Welcome to Adeptus On-Air, the show where we examine how individuals and companies make decisions that drive their business and personal success. Each week, we connect with notable professionals who pull back the curtain on the industries that Adeptus has been on the cutting edge of for the last 30 years, including music, sports, and entertainment, as well as new emerging markets.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Adeptus On-Air. I'm your host, Mike Hoffman, and today I am joined by award-winning animation director, John Lumgair. John, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. It's a pleasure to have you from across the Atlantic, talking to me from London today, correct?
That's true, yes.
Awesome. So Jazz Cow is an animated situation comedy about a jazz-playing cow who reluctantly leads a group of artists, poets, and misfits in resisting big tech guru Dr. Pop and his world of algorithms and fake filters. Pretty interesting. So how do you, what is your thought process to come up with something like that? Because obviously, you know, I guess you can take it from all angles. First of all, the music side of it. B, a cow. C, the storyline. So, you know, walk me through, because I've talked to a lot of creative minds. Talk to me about your creative process to kind of come up with the concept.
I think so much in life is not actually a kind of a process thing, but is a lot more, what's the word? It kind of, the old idea of the Greeks and all these would talk about a muse, and you kind of, inspiration does just hit, and that's kind of maybe not the fashionable thing to say these days because people want to have a kind of very scientific approach.
Sure.
But and I think there is a science behind it, but I think ultimately when the idea hits, of any idea, it just hits you, and usually late at night.
I was going to say, is it one of those things where you roll over at 2 a.m. and like, oh my God, that's brilliant?
So this actually started with a discussion with a group of friends, and we were having a laugh late at night and laughing and batting around silly ideas. And there was a comedy book. There was a book on cartoon animals, and we realized that they had the same kind of trajectory. So we thought, well, what happens if instead of someone being bitten by a spider and then having superpower kind of, why that kind of animal? So we were like, what about a cow? And then why the superhero ability of always fighting bad guys? Why not playing jazz? So it was a ridiculous conversation that it came from. But the thing with any kind of generation of creative ideas is they generally don't come when you expect them. I mean, it is true that you have the idea in the shower, or you have the idea when you're doing something else, and this was just having a laugh with friends. But it's a classic thing, and there is a book called by I think James Webb Young, but the name might be wrong, where he talks about technique for creating ideas, which was he's an old advertising guy, and he talks about like filling your brain with stuff, and then your subconscious does the work, and that's how it pops out. And I think he's probably right, and that's probably like the scientific underpinning, but the human experience doesn't feel like that.
But before this night with your friends, had animation been a part of your life?
Yeah, so we were studying animation together.
Okay.
We were all a bit obsessed with animation, and we would laugh a lot about animations because they were brilliant or because they were ridiculous, and so yeah, that was a big part of our lives. And when it came to the jazz thing, it's always interesting because you kind of post-rationalize. You're like, why jazz? Why did jazz pop in? I don't even know who said. This is the other thing about this. It's collaborative, so you don't even know who said what that night.
Right.
And when you get it with singer-songwriters and those teams where no one really knows where anything comes from. But
that allows you all to take credits. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And although I'm the one running with this project and these guys are involved, but in a very minor degree, I never want to be the guy that says it was mine.
Sure.
And I want to give credit to everyone along the way, and never kind of claim it all came out of my head, because it never did. But yeah, the jazz thing is hard because I don't know if it's a post-rationalization, but it was not that long before this happened that it was my birthday, and my housemates bought me an album, a Miles Davis album called In a Silent Way, and I'd been listening to this quite a lot before this discussion. Whether that was a subconscious influence or whether jazz came from somewhere else.
Jazz was on your mind. And if you're going to talk the greats of jazz, Miles Davis is right up there. So, I mean...
Exactly. And it is a brilliant album.
Yeah. So your passion for animation, were you just a big animated fan as a kid growing up? I mean, were you obsessed with cartoons as your kind of entertainment when you're watching TV?
You've got me. Yeah, I was obsessed with cartoons. And when I was a child, there were 4 channels. The 4th channel actually started in my childhood, but yeah, there were 4 channels, and only 2 of them really showed animation when I was growing up, and only for a very short amount of time per day. So I got as much feel as I possibly could.
Now, I don't know how it was like overseas, but here in the U.S., you had, Saturday mornings were a big cartoon morning. So you'd wake up and you'd have, your set. And then I remember coming home after school, and again, before a cable where you had 500 channels, we had 4 or 5 channels, and on 3 of them were soap operas. And on the other 2 were generally, cartoons. So it was either the stuff for the kids or the stuff for the moms. So was it similar over there or with like a Saturday morning, wake up and watch cartoon kind of thing?
Yeah, so Saturday morning, wake up, watch cartoons. And they'd also have live action stuff for kids, which I always felt was cheating because I don't really want to watch real people acting. And I had this, I kind of believed a conspiracy, maybe it's true, that they'd always put like the drama about a school at the same time about the drama about some animal hospital or something. And they'd always be at the same time, so that and cartoons would compete with cartoons, and then these kind of boring dramas aimed at kids would also compete. And I always wondered why. And I was quite conspiratorial. I don't know whether I should have been.
You were inquisitive. So that was your passion as a kid. So then, did you study? I know you said you kind of studied it. So when you went off to what do they call it, university? I guess in the UK.
Yes, yeah, it was university. So it was a BA honours, but I think it suffered from becoming a university. So it actually used to be more of a technical college historically. Then in the 90s they became universities, and I think they actually suffered through being a university. I think they were better before they were a university. But
yeah, what did you study? What was your plan of attack?
I actually studied animation.
Okay, so that was actually so you knew that's what you wanted to do right from the beginning. So you didn't your career trajectory didn't really pivot. You kind of been on this track, all the way through.
It pivots within the larger path, but yes, it's still going down the same path.
So how does so you studied animation, and then what's the next move after you study it? I mean, I know you launched a sitcom on Kickstarter at some point, but is that the next step, or how do you get to that point where you're actually creating your own and launching it?
Yeah, so after university, this was actually an idea that we pitched around some TV stations. So we went for Fox Kids and Cartoon Network. Fox Kids, we had a bit of a toing and froing, and then it stopped. So this ended up going into a draw, and for a good number of years. And then a few of us thought, right, we better properly form a company. So I formed a company with 2 other guys, and we did both live action and animation, and then just tried to do them for music videos and stuff for businesses and local government, that kind of stuff. So we did that we still do that. That's how we pay our rent.
I was going to say, that's what pays the bills, so you can pursue the juicy stuff.
But the problem is because that stuff is so time consuming
Yeah.
and hard to make money from, you don't actually end up getting as much time on the juicy stuff as you'd like.
Well, listen, this is the thing, this has kind of been a central theme through, a lot of these discussions I've had is, people want to chase their dreams and they know what they want to do, but to do it, they need money. So to do money, they need to work elsewhere. And by working elsewhere, it's taking them away from what they want to do. So it's kind of like a circle. They're kind of stuck in a circle and it's kind of hard to get out of it unless you have someone who's funding a project.
Exactly. And that is the challenge. And so this idea ended up just coming out of a drawer occasionally and being developed, but then the pressures of trying to earn money to pay rent and also other creative projects that you pursue. And so you spend a while on something and this stays in a drawer and then something else comes out. And then a guy a couple of years ago took this around streaming services and they were only interested in adaptations of books, comics and games. So at that point, the writer I'm working with, he said, why don't we put it on Kickstarter? And I was like, no, I don't want to do any kind of
Yeah. Well, yeah. Is it better now or worse now? Because now there are so many platforms that potentially, A, Kickstarter, B, you mentioned two networks before, Fox and, Cartoon Network that didn't exist when we were kids. Is that better or worse? Because I see there's more avenues now, but I also see there's a lot more people potentially trying to do what you're doing. So there's more avenues, but there's also probably more competition.
Yes, I think there are more avenues, which is a good thing. And I actually don't think the competition thing is such a big deal because there are more avenues. But what I think has happened, particularly in the last few years, the likes of Netflix and Disney and Amazon, they've slightly freaked out because their business model is of basically subscription and you see as much as you can for however much per month. That model is failing. And they spend such a lot of money on making something. And I think they're trying to push the risk onto the people making stuff. So that's why that's the reason they've ended up going for stuff that's based on books and games and things, is because they're basically trying to deal with the risk because it's really expensive to make anything.
Sure.
And so if you go, this book's been really successful, the people who like this book might like this series, it becomes a lot more attractive to them to work that way.
So with the model, in your opinion, like you said, the model doesn't work. What are their alternatives? I mean, besides a monthly fee or something like that, and you're right, and I've thought about this. If you think, let's just stick with Netflix for a second. You pay whatever you pay. The number doesn't matter. But then besides all the stuff that they're putting on their, old movies, forgetting even original programming, TV shows, old movies, things like that came from elsewhere. But now they're also adding in this original programming, which that's where they cost the money. So whether it's a comedy special, recently here was the Tom Brady roast. It was, these Adam Sandler contracts, this huge contract for a lot of movies. How do they balance, do you think? Okay, I know I'm getting this much in. Is there benefit to producing this original programming? Or do we stick with the other stuff that we know people have an interest in watching?
I think they've got to do original programming to keep people subscribed, but original programming is really expensive. And even old stuff, you've got to negotiate. Someone owns it. You've got to negotiate with somebody.
Correct.
And lawyers and all these people. That's why Disney did so well, is because they've got this amazing back catalogue. But their original stuff has not done so well as their back catalogue, which has been a big challenge for them. And I think because there's so many streaming services, where there was a time where it was basically Netflix and Amazon, certainly in the UK, you either had one or the other. Some people had both, but nobody has all of the services now because they'd have to be ridiculously rich.
Correct.
And so I think that's been a big challenge for them. I also think that they've overspent. So they do big lavish series like something like Bridgerton, which is incredibly expensive to make. I mean, it's been very successful, so maybe it's a bad example, but something like that, you could do 10 other lower budget things.
Well, that's kind of my point. Yeah, you wonder that I guess they have a creative team who works with their finance team, for lack of a better word, to kind of come up with it. What's the cost benefit of an extravagant production like Bridgerton? Or I'm trying to think, not being in the industry, something that's least expensive to produce, a comedy special or something like that, which really you're paying the comic and a venue and stuff like that, but relatively, obviously, much less time consuming as a resource, much less expensive, and so forth like that. What's the balance?
I think
without affecting the end user, without me having to pay $50 a month instead of my $12.
Yeah. I think the reality is stuff like Bridgerton costs a fortune, but it's the thing that makes people choose your platform over another, because they go, oh, wow, it's got these. And Shonda Rhimes she's so well respected that people are going to go, okay, she wants to do this really expensive, extravagant thing, but people will watch it because she's
the name behind it. Yeah.
But a lot of shows, I think they're just throwing money at, and they haven't ended up being that good. So I used an example of something that has worked well, but I think you could still do multiple shows for the price of one. So it's a trade-off.
But it's interesting now, if you look at, again, and I go back to your point before, because I think about this all the time, you grew up with 3 channels. I grew up with 3 channels. So when I was watching an award show, like the Emmys or whatever as a kid, I knew everyone that was nominated because I knew that show. Either I watched that show or I knew that show. Now the Emmy Awards, I've never heard of any shows that are nominated, or maybe 1 or 2, because there's so many different platforms. There's so many different shows that, to me, it's great to have more variety, but to me, there's too much that you can never watch everything, and you are picking and choosing. So, if you're someone who unfortunately doesn't have the resources to have Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, Paramount, Peacock, and I'm talking the U.S. ones, and I'm sure there's a lot more that you could think of right now. There's going to be shows that nominated that you might not even have access to watching, and that's unfortunate. So it's almost like the ones who have economic decisions to make are really missing out potentially on some quality programming.
I also think that they're poor recommendation engines, because when I go on Netflix, me and my wife will be flicking through looking for stuff for ages, but they've got a lot of stuff in their catalogue, and I don't believe all the stuff that I can't find is all complete rubbish. I imagine that there's stuff there that we would really like to see that we don't know exists.
Right.
And the kind of recommendation as well, in terms of being able to recommend to one another.
That's what it is.
If someone says, oh, this is a great show, and I know that they've got good judgment, or that they know me well enough that I'd like it, great. But then I've got to remember that, and I write a note or something.
But that's exactly what it is. I see stuff on Facebook. Someone posts, hey, great series. Just finished this. Can't wait for the next season. Got to watch this. Or I love when someone puts, hey, looking for my next show. What do you recommend? And then I read the 80 comments, and basically you get 60 recommendations out of it. And that's kind of how I do it too. And then the one good thing about it is you watch an episode. If it doesn't suck you in, you leave it. Now, I think that also puts a little more pressure now on you creators, because there's so much choices and so much variety now. And with all of our attention spans being like 0 now because of this thing right here, and watching, 5-second TikToks and things like that, if you don't suck me in episode 1, there's a good chance you don't get me for episode 2, because there's 80 other shows I could try. Where back as a kid, if I didn't like this episode of a show, I only had, in our case, 2 other networks really of the main networks. It was 2, 4, and 7, CBS, ABC, NBC. You had the other ones that were starting out. I had to go, okay, I don't like this show. What am I left with? Well, I don't like those 2 options, so I'm going to give this one another shot.
Yeah.
And since we're not watching most stuff real time, It's not even like I gotta say, okay, I don't like this. I'm gonna watch. I have two other choices. I don't like episode 1. I have 7,000 other options right now on how I'm gonna spend my next hour. I can watch episode 2, or I can try episode 1 of this other show.
And there must be so many great things that we never watch or never, because the way they build a story is just too slow for.
Yeah. And sometimes you need that boring stuff at the beginning to build the characters. And so, not every show can start with that police chase in the first minute or that, big moment. A lot of it is just two people having a conversation, but it's got to really, it's got to catch you. And I've seen it with, I've seen it with my kids. I mean, I remember a few years back, it was during COVID, we're stuck home and I'm trying, let's all watch a movie, whatever. So we pick a movie and I'm like, let's watch some of the movies that we liked younger. And I'm not even saying as a kid, and I remember putting on Forrest Gump. Great movie.
Yeah, it is.
Starts a little slow the first 15, 20 minutes. Both kids were out. No, I don't want to watch it. Now, it gets really good. It's entertaining, but it didn't suck them in. And, that's a perfect example to me of right there. And that's the problem because, okay, let's watch something else.
Yeah. Yeah,
so,
you've missed out on a good film because I'd like some human kind of, instead of it all just being done by algorithms, to actually have humans who are making decisions like TV executives in the past would schedule stuff that you'd go, okay, these are this film critic's top recommendations on Netflix right now.
That, like you said, that's the biggest joke. If I watch a romantic comedy, my top recommendations are not going to be 10 romantic comedies.
Yeah.
If I watch an adventure, suddenly my recommendations are suddenly going to switch because now I'm looking at a Western and I'm going to see 10 Westerns. Yeah, so it's based upon what you last watched. What they don't realize is maybe you just hated what you just watched.
Yeah.
But because you watched it.
That is a great one from that genre, but everything else in that genre that they have in their catalogue is not
correct,
like a high-quality film.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you take that into effect now? So going back to your thing for a little bit. So, with Jazz Cow, do you think your approach is different now in 2024 than it might have been in 1990?
So it was 2002 or something. But yeah, my approach is different. Well, because there wasn't such a thing as Kickstarter, so trying to run a campaign that wouldn't have existed. The idea of doing things in an indie way wouldn't have been an option. Mm-hmm. But then, like today, I was doing a drawing to promote Jazz Cow, and I've set up a GoPro on a lamp, not a fan, because that is the thing at the right height to be able to put it above what I'm drawing. And no one in the past would have been like, right, I'm going to film myself drawing for social media to try and draw attention to it. And I hate all of that. I don't want to be doing that. I just want to draw.
Yeah. No, that's right. So, yeah, it's kind of crazy. So, do you consider yourself more of a fan of TV or movies, or are you both? You enjoy both?
So, in terms of what I like films and long form TV the best. So, I actually think the great thing with all these Netflix and things when they came along with these long form shows, that you'd have really good narrative arcs that go over multiple episodes and all of that. And I feel TV has often fallen into we are here to keep you until the next ad break.
Yeah.
And with the model of removing ads and actually subscription base, I think that improved. That's why we had great TV that appeared that was like films. Mm-hmm. Now that's struggling, but I like stuff that isn't all about the ad breaks.
Yeah.
The kind of thing I'm emulating is something that's more akin to The Simpsons, so which is classic TV, but higher quality TV than, I don't know, something that's just been churned out
Right.
without any.
So what are your 3 or 4 favorite films of all time?
I hate it when people ask me that.
I won't ask you that then. Okay.
No. I can't.
Well, I'll start with this. Do you have a favorite genre?
So the genres I guess comedy is the easiest and most likely I will watch, just because it takes a lot less effort to consume. Films like Claudia with a Chance of Meatballs and they're slightly surreal kind of comedy, but it's got a bit more fullness to it than I really like an Arrested Development and things like that.
Great show.
But yeah, it's brilliant. But then I really like drama that's quite grey, where it really delves into human nature and some of the old classic films. I mean, a film like Kramer versus Kramer is really good because it's like not a lot really happens in it, but the characters are so well written.
Sure.
And I just think a lot of any film where you've got really well drawn characters there's a complexity I really like.
I like hearing the behind the scenes stuff. I literally, probably in the past week, saw like an old clip of an interview with Jason Bateman. He was on Howard Stern, and he was talking about how he got Arrested Development. And they said he had been kind of, typecast, kind of thing, because he was Teen Wolf 2. He had some U.S. sitcoms. Then he kind of became, I don't want to say blacklisted for lack of a better word, but he wasn't relevant for a while. Yeah. And he almost didn't know if he was going to go for this audition. And when he got there, they're like, they didn't consider him, I guess. And I guess the reason they didn't consider him is they said, listen, this is a low budget thing. You're not getting a nice dressing room. They kind of said, you're not getting any of this stuff. Do you still want this? Because they thought he was his name was too above it. And if you think about that cast, it's an excellent cast. There are people who have been in the industry for years, but might not be the biggest names. I mean, he became a huge name again. But, someone like a Jeffrey Tambor, he's been in probably 500 things. But most people won't know him by name. They might recognize his face. So he's not, and so forth. But he was great in that, and so forth. So it's just kind of funny. I like hearing how things came about. Or I love hearing that this person 10 years later turned down this role in this movie. Or like, Ocean's 11 or all those movies that Bruce Willis turned down the lead. Like stuff like that. I find it fascinating because then you try and visualize how would that movie have been?
Yeah.
If he had played it. The most recent one I heard was for Grease. Jeff Conaway, who played Kaneki, just finished being on Broadway playing the lead Danny Zuko. So he thought he wanted to play the lead. Then obviously they got John Travolta, who's a bigger name, and obviously it all made sense. So I think it's kind of funny how people audition for a different role and sometimes get another role, then you can't even imagine what would have happened if it was in reverse.
Yeah. It's because they make it their own. Samuel L. Jackson actually makes the point that when he takes on a role, he makes it a priority to make that role his own and to be so unique that it cannot be anyone else. And it cannot be and it's not Samuel L. Jackson, it is the character he's created.
Sure.
Which is why he's so different in every film. But
I guess that's an interesting thing for someone who's not in the industry is I'm hired to play a role. And obviously Samuel L. Jackson's at a level, that most people aren't at. I'm hired to play a role. It's the writers, it's the producers, it's the director's vision of that role. But I also want to make it my own. So you have to make it your own, but I got to believe you got to fall within the basic range of where they want it to go. I mean, you're obviously not changing the storyline. But, if they want this guy to be, a nasty, arrogant, whatever, you can't come in and be smiley, I love the world kind of person. I'm sure you could probably push it a different way, but I imagine there's a fine line between trying to make it your own and, not following the vision of the movie.
Well, I think there's a million and one ways where someone might be arrogant, and it's what they bring to that. What is that beyond the page? And the director will ultimately decide and say, no, that's not what I'm looking for. But it's fun when you work with an actor and they just give you suggestions, and I want to use a fair bit of improvisation because you get a lot out of comedians when they improvise. They just, particularly when they're together, they just kind of rub off one another, and it's quite fun.
Well, that's my favorite part of watching a comedy show is the improv crowd work. I mean, someone's routine is great, but when they can just, talk to someone in the crowd and just be brilliant based upon where the audience member's kind of taking the conversation, or someone just shouting out that, and I'm not one to believe that stuff's staged in any way. I do believe it's genuine, and the brilliant, that's where you kind of see someone's brilliance. And that's why, I've been to Second City before in like Chicago, and the improv people, and I do like comedy like yourself. I find the improv people to be absolutely brilliant. Because it's, listen, don't get me wrong, reading a script and acting, I mean, there's some people are just so brilliant, and you can tell that, you believe them. You believe that person to be that character. Even if you just saw them an hour earlier playing a different character, you just totally believe it. But someone who can kind of think off their feet, keep a storyline going, and you said bounce off of each other, which is what makes improv even better. It's not just me being improvising. I'm now improvising, and you're like, crap, I got to now come up with something. And we can make something hysterical just because we're just two brilliant, funny, creative individuals. And to me, there's nothing better than that. Yeah.
It is really fun. I remember working with one of the actors that we've got working on Jazz Cow, and years ago, and there's a series of concerts, orchestral concerts that happen every year in the UK called the Proms, and it's although they have the last night, which is the most famous thing, most of it is kind of a bit of it's aiming to be quite populist in some ways, but it's a bastion of classical music, and it was started by this guy called Henry Wood, and the BBC run an alternative thing called Electric Proms, which is more about pop music.
Yes.
And we worked with this band, and we were following this band around for the BBC years ago. And this actor that we got doing a voiceover, he just went, "Electric Prom? Henry would be turning in his grave." And it's just the way he just said it at that moment. It was just absolutely hilarious. And just putting that line in at the end, it made a film that was quite fun into something so much better just because of that.
And I think the best directors, producers, or whatever, are the ones who sometimes when things go awry, when it ends up making the final cut, and there's no ego involved. Like, okay, that made this scene better. And I've seen a bunch of again clips. I told you I love the after the fact things, hearing what went on behind the scenes, and it happened on Friends all the time, where they got off script because someone messed up and they went off of that, and it made the final cut. And it wasn't even something they thought about, but just in the moment, someone did something and it just added to the scene. It became brilliant. And boom, and it kind of stayed in. So it didn't change the trajectory of the story. It just enhanced the potential scene.
Yeah.
And I think when you're a character for so long, I think it's a combination. I think you become the character, but I think the character also becomes you.
Yeah.
I think that's the difference with like an 8 or 9 year running sitcom versus one film. Is that's your identity and so forth. So where there was this one scene they talked about where they took the late Matthew Perry off and said, "Listen, we need a good line from you. Like what do you think Chandler would say here?" And he actually came up with the line because they did it in the takes and the audience wasn't responding to the line they had. And they're having dialogue with him, like, what do you think you should be saying here? And sure enough, he came up with the line. It got a better reaction. And he kind of, rewrote how that was going. And I think I give the entire collaborative team there so much credit for not saying, I'm the writer, you're the actor, do what I say. But hey, you make this better. It makes us all better.
And it's even more the case with animation. So there's animation. So the guy that's going to be heading up the animation on Jazz Cow is a guy from Argentina, brilliant guy, and I worked on a project with him before. And there was a character that was falling into a pile of horse manure, and this character's kind of falling back. And I'd done the storyboard, and I knew what the shot was going to be, and he just said, "I've got an idea," and then sent back his idea. And he just added, the Flintstones twinkly toes thing.
Yeah.
When they do the bowling, he just added the little twinkly toes before the fall. It makes the shot so much funnier. It's so much better. Right. And I'd never have thought of that. But it's that thing of being open to what people have got, and it always lifts. And I think there's so many different people doing things within film and animation that you want to get the best out of everyone.
Yeah. Now your animation, I assume, there's you have voice actors and actresses who do the voicing. Do you find sometimes that I don't want to get too much into an animation discussion because obviously our time's running out, but the animation is created before the sound, correct?
No. So you do the sound, you record the voices first.
And then you make the animation match it.
And do the animation to match the voices.
Which makes more sense to me because that gives the actors and actresses, the way to be crazier with this or the way they accentuate something as opposed to having to match the lip movement. That makes more sense.
No. And then you can make the acting in the animation. You can push that further as well because you're reacting to what the voice is.
Right. Do you do several cuts? Meaning, do you have me do it a few different ways so then you can see which way comes out better on animation? Meaning, go over exaggerate the scream, or give me a normal scream kind of thing, so you can have choices.
With audio, yes, because audio's once you've got people there, it's not not hard to do extra takes. When it comes to the actual animation, you really stick pretty closely to storyboards, and it's the storyboard stage that you keep rejigging because that's cheap and easy to do.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I wish you the best of luck with that. I definitely want to check it out. Like I said, I'm not a huge animated person, but it's always nice to check something out when you know the people behind it. How can people follow you and the status of that on social media and so forth? Yeah,
so the actual website is jazzcow.co.uk, or jazzcow.tv. We bought a domain name recently, jazzcow.tv. And on Instagram, you can look up jazzcow.tv, or Quirky Motion, which is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can find Quirky Motion, which is my company. Or you can search for my name, John Lumgair, and I'm on all the main social medias too.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on. This is really interesting stuff. I wish you nothing but the best of luck and success with Jazz Cow, and definitely want to check it out when it's ready.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Adeptus On-Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.